The Last of Us released its first 2 episodes, and as a fan of the video game, I feel it necessary to praise it and air some concerns. There will be a critique of the first 2 episodes in this video, but first I want to answer a question that has almost certainly plagued the video game savants for quite some time. Why aren't there any great video game adaptations in cinema? Well, there is a reason. Everything that has came out in the past few decades has either been unremarkable or sheer and utter garbage. Video game adaptations are difficult to pull off. It requires a lot of creative writing to weave in what the game offers you, because a lot of what the game offers you can't be shown on the big screen. In games, for example, you can get side dialogue from NPCs while you're moving from one place to the next. This is crucial because it either adds external context to a situation or location that you're in, or it simply helps build the world and make it feel more alive. You can interact with items that give information. This can also help with world building, but it can often explain the governmental or political aspects of a particular area. Depending on the structure of the game, the potential in this regard is quite literally limitless. In some formats, you can read books upon books of information that give a comprehensive backstory of an entity or species. Or you can see how an area's judicial system deals with petty crimes. There's an element of choice involved with this as well. If the player doesn't interact with these items, it'll cost him little to nothing, but if he does, it can vastly improve the world in his eyes and award him with knowledge of what is to come. The stealth, action, and combat sequences in games are widely dynamic and can't be perfectly replicated in films, save maybe some cutscenes. With that said, a film can't just take its video game adaptation from cutscenes alone. It would never pan out. One of my favorite levels from Halo Combat Evolved was Assault on the Control Room, but if a production company only used cutscenes from that to try to make the level into an episode of a TV series, they'd end up showing Master Chief flipping a couple of light switches. That last example isn't an excuse for the catastrophic failure that's Paramount's Halo series. That dumpster fire failed for a plethora of reasons. The point that I'm getting at is, as much as a game can construct a plot, set, and themes for creative direction, it can't be copied and pasted directly. It needs a lot of work. So how does this tie into The Last of Us? I suppose a compare and contrast is in order. Let's start from the top. The intros are nearly identical. They both show a fungus spreading its filth far and abroad. The show retained the same acoustic plucking that the game has, which pulls fans right in. We are entranced with nostalgia. The only thing that's different about the show's version is the aerial view that we get, and I can't help but get Game of Thrones vibes from this. In the video game, we get the world's collapse through a series of interactions. A newspaper talking about people going crazy, hospitals overwhelmed, and contaminated crops. Dogs are barking in the background, and a news anchor blows up on live television. We are then thrusted into the collapse, and that is our story. The TV version shows us an interview from what is assumably a virologist and mycologist in 1968. The mycologist gives us a reason for fungi to evolve and explains how an eventual pandemic could start. We then proceed to 2003 and just about the same order of events play out as in the game. Sarah's perspective is extended a bit more and the pace is slowed to make society's collapse feel realistic and plausible. The writers clearly want to give a reason for the events that are to come to keep the audience from asking why at any turn. This is a perfectly fine thing to add, and if I hadn't played the game, I could see myself asking the same question. Why did all this just seem to start now? After the death of Joel's daughter, we flash forward to 2023. That puts the show at 3 time hops in the first 35 minutes. However, all these skips mesh well without the set feeling incongruous. The game starts the last time hop with Joel waking in bed. He has a short conversation with Tess where they express a conflict and a plan of action before they head off. During their travel time, NPCs are talking about work duty they are unwillingly assigned and lynchings being dealt. Some are being beaten in the streets and others are talking about how their friend was kidnapped during the night. This all sets the precedent that the local government is draconian and the conditions are harsh. In a game, you can absorb all this while taking in the scenery and getting yourself familiar with a possible route you may have to remember. It all fits. However, if the show did this, it would increase the runtime tenfold and you would feel it really start to drag. So how does the show remedy this? They start the time hop with Joel completing work duty, an innocent girl being euthanized, her body later being burned, and Joel witnessing a lynching of a group of people for simply being out after curfew. He then makes a shady drug deal and meets with Tess where they then express the conflict and plan of action. The show establishes the same ground rules as the game does, so why the switch? Well, the show does it in a way that cuts out all the forgettable faces, excessive dialogue, and tedious walking. This is what I'm getting at, case in point. We're not 10 minutes into the first part of the main storyline, and there's a major amount of creative writing that has to be done to meet the viewer's needs while satisfying the game's fan base. This is where a majority of video game adaptations fail. There's a fault line that the writers have to walk when making changes. Stick too close to the game and you'll have cast bloat and a sluggish tempo. Stray too far away from the source material and you'll wind up missing a lot of important moments that the original IP so generously gifted you. The Last of Us is walking this line rather well thus far in the first 2 episodes, and I really hope that continues. Now that that's been identified, let's get into the critique. Pedro Pascal gives a dismal Texan accent as Joel. It pales in comparison to Troy Baker's voice acting.
We'll pick you something up on the road. We can't frame until we pour. We're not getting paid until we frame. No. I'm not splitting this job. I barely want to split it with you.
Here's how this thing's gonna play out. You don't bring up Tess. Ever. In fact, we just keep our histories to ourselves. Secondly, don't tell anybody about your condition. And lastly, you do what I say when I say it.
The amount of presence that Baker commanded was impressive considering it was just his voice. I don't think it's asking too much to try to replicate that in the TV show. An example of voice acting performed exceptionally would be Henry Cavill from the Witcher series.
Evil is evil. Lesser, greater, middling, makes no difference.
Evil is evil, Struggle. Lesser, greater, middling. It's all the same.
Pascal's acting is good, but his voice just comes up short. Bella Ramsey's British accent breaks through sometimes as well.
So what's the deal with you anyway? You some kind of bigwig's daughter or something?
Something like that.
Something like that. A small continuity issue that I noticed is 20 years went by and all we got is a bit of gray hair in Joel's appearance. In these tough times, I would think that one would age at the rate of a modern-day president. While on the topic of appearance, I can't help but notice that Tess and Ellie look a bit more homely in the TV series.
Something like that.
Something like that. I get that this is probably dumb and superficial, but everything about a character's appearance should add to the overall believability, but no matter, this is really a small issue. When we meet Tess, she's being held hostage by Robert and some of his goons. There's an explosion that incapacitates everybody in the room but her, which is how she escapes. It would be an understatement to call this a small contrivance. It's hard to tell because she had already been mugged, but I don't even think the explosion left a scratch on her. There are other changes from the game in the first 2 episodes that I loathe. I don't like how the series portrays Ellie when we first meet her. The game introduces her as just a kid that needs to be transported for payment. At this point, she comes off as sweet and innocent. The only reason she pulls a knife on Joel and Tess is because of a misunderstanding where Marlene crawls through the door. She holds a knife like she has no idea what she's doing with it. She is not trying to kill. In the show, she just flat out tries to murder Joel. The game also implies there's a good relationship between Marlene and Ellie, and that's all the player needs to know. She's simply a child who has grown attached to someone watching over her. The show starts Ellie off with giving Marlene's henchman the finger. I understand that this is in line with Ellie's character in the game.
Take all my food, too, while you're at it.
By the looks of it, you could lose some of that food.
Listen to me, you little shit.
No, fuck you! You handcuffed me!
Ellie is quick to mouth off to anybody who acts disrespectful towards her, but Ellie feels so uncomfortable around Marlene that she gives her a fake name. Ellie is shown as being Marlene's prisoner, but for some reason Ellie is more comfortable leaving with Marlene than with Joel and Tess. That may have to do with Joel throwing her bitch ass into a wall, but in the game Ellie implores Marlene to take her. You see, the show doesn't adequately develop a rapport between the two.
I did. Ellie. You my fucking mom or something?
The main reason these series of changes are so irritating is because it robs us of Ellie's innocence so early on. She can't become a more callous product of her environment if she already is that. I also think the change between what Joel and Tess are smuggling is strange.
Who has our guns?
The film shows us Joel dealing drugs, but what they are ultimately trying to procure is a car battery. In the game, it's implied they smuggle guns and drugs almost exclusively. I get that we skipped the whole scene in the game where Joel and Tess hunt down and kill Robert, but I find leaving out the gun smuggling worrisome. Now, I have a question for fans of the series that have played the game. What is the central theme behind The Last of Us? What does the story flirt with and ultimately gut punch us with at the end? That theme is moral ambiguity. I fear the more we reduce the severity of Joel's actions throughout the series, the less the payoff will strike true at the end. This same reduction in severity is repeated at the climax of the first episode. The game shows Joel and Tess reacting on instinct and killing a group of officers in a life or death situation. Ellie then reacts by saying,
Oh, fuck! I thought we were just gonna hold him up or something.
Notice how she retreats backwards, regretting the lives that were taken as a result of her actions. Also, notice she says sorry while stabbing at the officer. The show instead has one officer, and shows Joel having a flashback of his daughter being killed. He then proceeds to beat the officer to death as a result. I don't like this change at all. Joel has been hardened over 20 years since his daughter's death and should have no attachment to Ellie at this point. He shouldn't lash out in anger on her behalf or his daughter's behalf. Didn't he heave a fucking child his daughter's age into a bonfire at the beginning of this episode? In the game, Joel is portrayed as being more stoic and in control. The relationship between Joel and Ellie should be building up to the end of the show, but if they have Joel make random outbursts like this, then I could see his character arc being squandered. Not to mention, this should portray Ellie losing some of her innocence and changing as well. She gives an awfully strange reaction to this encounter that the show is trying to portray as shock. And honestly, I don't know what she's feeling here. This looks demented. We get no sign of remorse from Ellie as the show immediately cuts to her infection reading. I surely hope that this small scene is not a foreshadowing of things to come. Hopefully the writers have something good come out of it and I eat my words. I enjoyed the second episode a lot more than the pilot and its ending. The episode mainly consists of establishing more ground rules and staring in awe at the city slowly overtaken by the elements. The finale has only changed slightly. The attackers that come after Tess are not Fedra, they are instead the infected. This change is satisfactory and ties into the ground rules that were presented earlier in the episode. It's also satisfying being able to see Tess go out with a bang. There was one thing about this scene that felt like it really missed the mark. In the game, Tess and Joel's relationship was odd. Are they lovers, partners, or friends? We really don't know. Then Tess leans in almost seductively and says,
"Look, there's enough here that you have to feel some sort of obligation to me, so you get her to Tommy's."
I think this perfectly described their relationship. There's just enough there. The show swaps this out for some lighthearted canoodling to show that they're in fact lovers, but I prefer the former revelation. As the audience, we typically want to see everything, but sometimes it's just as important to remain unenlightened. Though it may seem like it, I promise I don't hate this series. Try to look at it this way. Everything I didn't evaluate, I probably liked to a degree. To end this on a good note, I have a commendation that you may find interesting. I think the casting choice for Marlene may be the best I've ever seen. Everything about her is a perfect delineation of what is presented in the game. Trust me when I say this is an honor that I give sparingly. I'm rather hopeful about The Last of Us. I think the series is headed in the right direction. Whether they continue to straddle the ever-swaying tightrope that is a faithful adaptation is yet to be seen. I would love to say that there's a best in the video game movie genre, but whether I'm able to, well, only time will tell.